Hey guys, welcome back to another Law of the Empire podcast episode. I'm your host, Reina, and today's episode is especially exciting because we're joined by Kristine, who is a PhD student in the Department of International Relations at the London School of Economics. Her research focuses on how technology facilitated gender-based violence, aka TFGBV, manifests for women, peacebuilders, and activists, and she also explores the implications for their participation in peacebuilding efforts. I really enjoyed my conversation with her, and I know you will all learn a lot from hearing this podcast episode. She's super educated and she knows a lot about her field. So, without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hi, so could you tell me a bit about yourself, your research, what you're doing right now?
Yes, so nice to meet you, Reina. I'm Kristine. I'm a PhD student at the London School of Economics in my first year of my PhD in international relations. My topic is on technology facilitated gender-based violence, or TFGBV. We'll go into what that very long word means a bit later. But I look at that phenomenon, TFGBV, in conflict-affected context. So I'm specifically interested in how women in particular experience and navigate digital violence in situations of extreme vulnerability. So we're living in a time when conflict is unfortunately on the rise, while digital technology is also. And so kind of I look at the intersection of these two things.
That's so interesting. So, could you tell me a bit about what TFGBV means in everyday terms?
Yes, so kind of bit of word salad, bit of
Mhm.
like alphabet soup, as we like to call it. Essentially, it's just digital violence that has an element of gender in it. And so, what that means is someone using some kind of digital tool, whether that's a social media platform or a piece of hardware, so that's a phone or an Apple AirTag or anything like that, to commit an act of violence that is rooted in someone's gender. So, we have digital violence in general, which can and does happen to anyone. But then if it's gender motivated, which can happen to both women, men, and non-binary people, then we have this element of gender-based violence. So an example of that might be calling someone, a gender-based slur or using harmful anti-LGBTQ plus language. Um, Using a piece of software to track someone. So that's something called spyware. That's when that's installed on your device and someone tries to find where you are. These can all have non-gendered elements, but they can also have gendered elements. So I'm looking at kind of this element of targeting and pursuing someone using a digital tool because of their gender.
hmm So, how does TFGBV affect women peace builders differently than other women online?
Yes, absolutely. So, a lot of emerging research on this topic, which is becoming very widely talked about actually across the whole political spectrum. It's something that the current administration has actually focused on recently, and past administrations were also focused on in the US. Um, it's something there's been a lot of attention paid to, particularly for women politicians as well as for women journalists. This is something we've talked a lot about how women journalists, women politicians don't share their opinions online. They aren't able to run as freely in elections. They receive disproportionate hate, which can deter them from wanting to participate. There's something called the chilling effect, which is basically even if you aren't the direct target of violence, if you see that other people are experiencing violence, um, you may be likely to disengage from politics or public life in order to avoid experiencing that violence yourself. So, a lot of that research focuses on women who already exist in the global north, so in countries that are more digitalized, or they focus on women who already have positions of power, right? So if we're looking at politicians, those are people who already have access to some level of resources, to connections, to protections. For women in conflict affected contexts, sometimes also called peace builders, so women who are working to kind of resolve conflict, this can entail a wide variety of different activities. They, first of all, don't have access to similar resources as women politicians might. That can be both in terms of financial resources. They might not have the financial capacity to get protections for themselves. Um, they might not also have resources in terms of legal advice, connections. There also may be just a general dearth of resources. So, what that means, for example, one of the main tools we have against digital violence is being able to report it on a platform. However, if reporting mechanisms aren't available in the language that you speak, that can be difficult to do. So, first of all, affects people differently and the resources they have to deal with this. They might not all have access to mental health services. We know that mental health disturbances are a big portion, a big part of what happens as a result of TFGBV. So, you might not have access to that. You might actually also be physically unsafe because this violence happens on a spectrum from online to offline. Um, and so basically, your lack of access to resources. And it also might have really strong implications, right? Like the work that you're doing, people who engage in peace and security work often do so out of necessity. And so kind of makes dangerous to do work that is quite essential.
That's fascinating. So, why do you think they target women in particular besides just gender bias? Is it just gender bias or is there a deeper issue behind it?
So I think there's, something people working in this field like to clarify is that just because it has a new form doesn't
Mhm,
mean that digital gender-based violence is a new phenomenon. In fact,
mhm,
it's an extension of age-old gender-based violence, of patriarchal violence, of everything we've seen in history in terms of how um, women are discriminated against and subjected to violence, not even to begin to mention LGBTQ plus people as a result of their gender. We also see lots of different violence as a result of women who are also people of color, women who are ethnic or religious minorities, women who may have different abilities and things like that. Um, I think that for women in conflict affected contexts in particular, they are often advocating for the end of conflict. They are often advocating for a change in the status quo. There's a really interesting article by Zoe Marks and Erica Chenoweth called Why Autocrats Fear Women and Gender Equality. This is a really fascinating article. I highly recommend it. It's available, I think it's in Foreign Affairs magazine. But they talk about how women are often part of social movements that lead to democracy and equality in general. So women lift up with them. So
mhm.
when violence and things are happening, people are opposing these ideas in general. So it's a dual element of both there being gender bias as gender violence to begin with, and then also the ideas that women are advocating for.
So it's like they're not only pursuing women because they're women, but also because of the ideas they're advocating for. And
Yes,
a lot of times they're also like against the ideas of equality and stuff. So they're pursuing women, but also the ideas that they stand for. That's really
exactly,
interesting.
exactly.
So what kind of implications this kind of violence have for women participating in the peace building efforts?
Yes, so this is something that my research, hopefully over the next couple years of my PhD, will look at a bit more in depth. It's something that we don't have a great understanding of yet in terms of what the exact implications are, particularly because women who exist in conflict affected contexts already overcome quite a few different challenges in their lives, right? They already exist in contexts of extreme violence. They already exist in contexts of extreme resource scarcity. And so the exact effect of how this particular kind of violence affects them um, is currently something we need to talk to them more about. So basically, the root of my research will be asking women, how does this affect you in your work?
Mhm,
Some of the things we see is that it deters women from wanting to participate in peace activities because they are targeted. We've heard some reports that their families are targeted in terms of like threats to their children, threats to their families. Um, if they don't stop their work. They risk being what something called doxed is when your information is shared without your consent, which can result obviously in people coming and finding you and causing you physical harm or physically threatening you. Um, there's also lots of implications in terms of how AI is being used, both in terms of creating, big conversation is deepfakes, but also for military targeting for drones and things like that. That's kind of an evolving conversation. One of the things I'd like to talk to women a bit more about.
mhm,
So basically, all to say, believe that the general effect is it deters them from being able to do this absolutely essential work.
mhm.
Um, but we need to have conversations with them to hear more specifically what it is exactly that is going on.
Okay, got it. So, are there any certain regions or conflict zones where TFGBV is more prevalent or particularly dangerous?
So I think we have a tendency, and when I say we, I mean
Mhm,
global North countries, people who work on this issue, people who commit policy, to have this incorrect idea that only certain countries are digitalized and therefore digital violence isn't an issue across different conflict affected contexts. So actually, very recently, I'm deciding currently on what cases I'm going to look at for my PhD. So which conflicts specifically I'm going to try and speak to women in. Part of this process is seeing if I can find reported examples of digital violence in these conflicts. And every single conflict I checked using both ACLID data. So ACLID also tracks a bunch of different conflicts. The Women, Peace, and Security conflict tracker, looking at how women are impacted across different conflicts, and then just lists of ongoing conflicts. Every single one has examples of digital violence against women being reported in these contexts. So it's something that seems to be prevalent across all contexts. We've heard reports of it from everywhere from Ukraine. It's very common in Myanmar. This is a conversation that's being had for a long time. We see examples of it in Colombia. That's even post-conflict and in the process of establishing peace. So it seems to be, unfortunately, a bit omnipresent.
Mhm. Okay. So, what strategies have women peace builders developed to protect themselves online?
So this is the second part of the research
Mhm.
that we'll be doing, is to figure out what exactly women are doing. One thing I know to be true about women, especially those working in conflict affected contexts, is they are resilient and brilliant. And facing many threats, they innovate, adapt, and overcome these challenges. Um, we'll see what they do. A bit general strategies are using pseudonyms online. It's not
Mhm.
posting where you are. Is, potentially also switching yourself to have a male online presence.
Mhm.
We actually don't have that many specific reports of what women are doing at this point. So this is something further that I'll be
Mhm.
curious to hear directly from them what strategies they're employing.
I would expect it to be kind of hard for them to kind of open up to you sometimes too if they're scared of being dodged or like put in a position of vulnerability if they share with you what they're going through or what their online presence actually is.
Absolutely. So a big part of doing any research, especially feminist-based research, is the priority for all research is to be ethical and collaborative and make sure that no harm comes to anyone who participates in your research. So kind of absolutely like absolutely central to any research that I end up doing. Like I said, I'm very early on in the process, will be to make sure that people are completely irrecognizable in the data. So whether this means doing completely anonymous interviews, whether this means changing certain information, essentially central to the work will be protecting the identities of the people who share with me. I'll also be trying to work directly with organizations in these countries to kind of ensure that I have a working relationship with these women, as well as working with them to see what is productive for them. So a big challenge with feminist research or research in general is it can be very extractive. To correct myself, feminist research aims to not be extractive. A lot of research is extractive, which is basically when a researcher goes in, takes information from the participant, and then leaves and does nothing to help the actual situation. So, a goal of feminist research is to be non-extractive and be collaborative.
Mhm.
So, as I design my research, I hope to work directly in whatever case that I choose to do, whatever country I choose to work in,
Mhm.
to try and design something where it's not just, oh, I'm writing a project on this for a PhD for academia, but what are some specific outputs that we can do, whether that's a guide to being safe online, whether it's policy calls to specific governments, working with women directly to hear what would be useful to you. So yes, absolutely, you're right that it can be dangerous, but a big part of the research will be taking precautions to limit those dangers.
Yeah, I think the way you just explained you're going about it is extremely ethical and honorable for those women in these positions. So, how does digital platforms play a role in either enabling or preventing gender-based violence?
Yes. So this is kind of the million-dollar question, in that
Mhm.
a lot of times when we talk about policy and we talk about conflict in particular, we don't necessarily talk about the role of the private sector and of private companies. But it's absolutely essential when we talk about digital violence, because it happens through platforms and via tools that are provided to people. So it's a bit different when you look at spyware and things like that, because those are programs that are specifically designed to cause harm. But platforms like social media and things like that, my personal opinion is that there is quite a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of social media companies that they are not currently taking seriously. Obviously, you cannot prevent all abuse that happens on platforms. You can do quite a lot, though, in terms of making sure there are sufficient resources for people to be able to report violence that happens to them. Within the field, there's also a term called safety by design, which is basically creating products, whether that's physical or whether that's online products like platforms and things like that, where the safety of the individual, whether they're a man or a woman or a non-binary person, is prioritized over the profitability of the product. An example of that, which is very easy, is if you were to make an Instagram account or a Facebook account, that by default, it had the highest privacy settings, and then you had to go in yourself and make it public if you wanted to do that. Where right now it is the opposite of that. So when you make an account, it has the lowest privacy settings. So things like that are small things that companies can actually do. And then, again, putting proper resources into making sure that people can report when abuse is happening to them. We hear reports from people that they submit complaints or they submit evidence that they've been harassed on these social media platforms and nothing is ever done. And it's also because there's just such a large scale of it. So there's tools that can be used pretty easily to protect people, even despite the fact that, of course, you can't control what individuals go on and say on these platforms.
Mhm. Do you think these companies kind of benefit from allowing this violence of women or non-binary people to occur? Like, do they benefit from this? And is that why they don't try and stop it?
In my opinion, yes.
Mhm.
Misogyny sells, and it's content that frequently goes viral. It's
Mhm.
content that frequently gets a lot of engagement, both positive and negative. We see lots of studies, even in the US, that far right content is prioritized and is profitable because it's something that people engage with. So there's we call this algorithmic amplification, where basically harmful content is amplified by these platforms because it is engaging, because it gets a lot of clicks, because it gets lots of views. I will say I do think it's also profitable for companies to take the protection of people seriously. So, in the world of digitalization, we have something called the gender digital divide, which is essentially that across the world, women are not as online as men. Women don't have access to the same digital tools as men. Part of this is just lack of access. So, whether that's specific dynamics within a family, whether it's like repressive gender norms, whatever, some things are just like women don't have as much access. Gender equality is a problem. But there's also the point of women don't feel safe in online spaces or may not choose to feel safe with certain tools. And so I think for companies to communicate that they are take the safety and privacy of women seriously actually also opens up a market and is profitable for them if they do so. So while right now violence sells, I do also think that safety is a way to profitability in that women are 50% of the global population. That's a market that you want to make sure that you unlock if you are thinking from the perspective of a tech company. And so ensuring that your product is something they want to use and feel safe using is something that's going to make sure that you actually are able to access them.
So, are there technological tools or policies you think could make a real difference in reducing these risks?
I think we're seeing the beginning of some policy emerge. So, one of the things that's challenging with addressing this issue with policy is that it's a transnational problem, right? So, I can be sitting right now, I'm in Denmark, and we're talking over Zoom. And if I were to cause you digital harm at this point, it would be difficult from a legislation and policy purpose about whose responsibility is that. It'd be difficult for me to be prosecuted. So the lack of coherence across different territories is a challenge, but there are still examples of countries taking steps to prevent this kind of harm. So I know Australia has something called the E-Safety Commission, which looks at basically rules for how to create pro-social and safe digital environments for everyone, for children, for women, for men, for everyone. Um, I believe the UK has just passed some laws on anti-deepfakes, so basically making it illegal to create explicit deepfakes of individuals. I think the US is also passing some similar legislation right now. Like I said, across the aisle, across political spectrums, this is something that people are concerned about. I think a larger issue, though, is addressing this problem at its roots. So when we talk about gendered violence, it is something that occurs offline, online has occurred throughout history, and it is rooted in gender inequality, in patriarchal beliefs, and in the belief that it's okay to commit violence against women and non-binary people. So, in order to fully address this problem, we need to try and tackle gender inequality itself. So, that's creating social reform, that's working on teaching people why patriarchy harms all genders, right? So, men also suffer as a result of the norms that are established by patriarchy, taking seriously those things and having conversations. So I think there are policy mechanisms that can be helpful, but I do think the main root is addressing the issue of patriarchy
Do you have any
as a
specific
whole.
do you have any specific ideas on how to address the issue of patriarchy?
In a non-politicized
Mhm.
world, in a world where resources are open, I think having conversations, particularly with children, is the way to do so. Um, So that's a good place to start. And this is like, some people be like, that's gender ideology, but I actually just think teaching everyone deserves your respect. Everyone deserves like basic human decency, and everyone deserves the chance to be whoever they are in whatever way that means to them is a really good way to start. I think a lot of hate is taught and not innate. And so basically just starting there in terms of teaching others that everyone deserves respect. um, I think there are ways to do it in terms of some of my prior research looked on men and masculinity, and a lot of times we don't really think about the ways that men contribute to and also suffer from expectations of patriarchy, and expectations of masculinity under patriarchy. So trying to engage in some of those conversations with men. Definitely there are conversations about who should be doing this work. I think other men should be doing this work because obviously a lot of um, women, LGBTQ plus people have come out and been like, it's not our job to educate men into respecting us. But I think a lot of it just starts with conversations. I think individuals can do that in terms of teaching their kids to just respect others, taking conversations with family members who might have opinions that are different than yours, and kind of engaging in a good faith conversation can be good ways to start.
Yeah, I totally agree with you 100%. So why is it important for people outside of peace building or academia to understand TFGBV?
Yes, so with TFGBV specifically is something that can impact anyone, anywhere. We see really significant reports of it among young people. So we see it both for men and women experience it. Sextortion, which is where if you share an explicit image of yourself or are tricked into sharing an image of yourself and then someone asks for money from you, that's something that's really rampant among young men. We see that in schools, lots of women or young girls are experiencing their classmates making deepfake images of them. We see it happening to politicians. We see it happening to, everyday citizens. So it's something that can impact everyone. So I think it's important to think about that from the perspective. This is an issue that can affect us all, and we should care about it. The second thing is when harm is caused to someone, I think we all just as a society should care. So if women in conflict affected contexts are telling us this is an issue, that is enough of a reason for all of us to care and think about it. And then lastly, just from a more strategic and policy level perspective, evidence shows again and again in different studies across academia, across policy literature, when we have women represented in peace agreements, when we have women represented in peace negotiations, we have women's voices heard when we are trying to solve conflict, that peace is more likely to hold, it is more durable, it is more likely to include provisions that are good for everyone, it's more likely to have institutions that are trusted, and that creates better societies for all of us, right? Conflict is a cost to the world. Um, so having diverse groups who participate in peace agreements, making sure that those voices are meaningfully heard, creates a better, safer world for all of us.
Yeah, totally. So, like, when do you think the effects of the patriarchy really settle in? Like, what age? And, like, when do kids really start experiencing this?
That I think you'll have to speak to like child psychologists or people who
Mhm.
study children's socialization a bit more. That unfortunately I don't know all
Mhm.
that much about. But I think, just in my experience in my life, it's pretty early on
Mhm.
because we're just taught this is how boys are and this is how girls are. It's all the way down to like, oh, like baby clothes, blue is for boys and pink is for girls. And it's very small things, but it means that we have these expectations for how we're supposed to be. Um, so I think it starts off very young. I
Yeah.
won't comment on the specific like
Mhm.
child development phenomena on that just because that's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, but as you were saying, like all the small things kind of build up over time to create the super rigid structures we have between genders.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, what do you hope your research will accomplish in terms of policy, technology, or awareness?
Yes. So, kind of first is just filling this empirical gap and answering the question, what does digital violence against women look like in conflict affected context? So, right now we have very disparate ideas of what that looks like. So, we have little stories from all sorts of different places. And so, creating a better picture and understanding the problem to begin with, I think, is the first kind of major contribution that I hope that my research will make. The second thing is looking at how women interpret this violence and understanding what is their relationship to it. Is it a priority? My research genuinely might find, and that's the point of research, that this is not a priority, that this is not, it's happening, but there are other things that are more pressing and we should pay attention to this, which is an important contribution, an important finding, right? Like in terms of saying, okay, what are the other things that are important? If we find out that's important, if we find out this is a central issue that women are facing, hopefully part of the conversation will also be what can be done in terms of creating better platforms, you know, giving them tools to be safer. Is that digital literacy training and making sure that when we do efforts that are meant to empower women, that we include digital aspects for that. And then, like I had mentioned before, I hope that I can work directly with the women that I interview, the women that I eventually include in my research, to also speak with them about what would be useful for them. So that will obviously be something that we figure out together. Um, but I hope that I can contribute to their work. So the organizations that I hope to collaborate with, that I can amplify their work, that I can amplify the things they're already doing, and then I can help them create something that is useful to them.
Okay, so my last question for you is, do you have any book recommendations for high schoolers or college students that are interested in this topic?
So I was thinking about this question. This was the hardest one you posed me. I think in general, if you are interested in gender in the context of international relations, one of the first books I wrote on the topic, and to this day, one of my favorite books of all time in general, is called Bananas, Beaches, and Bases by Cynthia Enloe. It is
Okay.
considered a seminal text in feminist international relations. It's written in an extremely accessible way, and it just kind of shows all the ways that gender operates in our world. She basically asked the question, where are the women? And
Mhm.
shows all the ways that by asking this question, we can actually learn more about the world around us and about international relations in general. With regards to books specifically about TFGBV, I actually am not aware of any right now.
Mhm.
Many might be forthcoming. This topic has gained a lot of traction in the last 2 to 3 years. Book publishing cycles are that long slash a bit longer, so there might be many forthcoming. In general, I recommend trying to read feminist nonprofit organizations. So Glitch is a great resource for this topic. So is an organization called Chain, which is CHAYN. They have really great resources in this. And then an organization called the Association for Progressive Communications, APC. They also do many great resources on this topic. They have lots of different things they cover, everything from individuals and resources for individuals who have experienced technology facilitated gender-based violence, to looking at kind of some of the policy and larger scale implications. So unfortunately, I don't have any specific book recommendations on TFGBV, but those are the places that I would start to look for people who are interested in that topic.
Okay, thank you so much for your time and for everything. I learned so much, and I'm sure everyone else did too.
I'm so glad. It was so great to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Law of the Empire. Let's all give one big final thanks to Kristine for coming on the podcast. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure you all did too. If you liked this episode, stay tuned for new episodes coming out every other week on Wednesdays, and follow us on Instagram at Law of the Empire. Until next time, bye!